Hey everybody, we're doing it again. I love hosting podcasts and getting into these conversations and digging a little deeper. This time it's with someone I know a bit, so who knows what we're going to uncover. Let me officially introduce this week's guest. Today's guest is a gentle disruptor. She knows work is changing, but the beliefs still hold true. People want to do work that matters. For over 20 years, she has worked with organizations and executives who want to make a positive difference in the lives of those they lead and serve. She's the founder of WorkMatters Incorporated, a leadership expert, author, speaker, and trailblazer in her field who helps CEOs and executives shape corporate culture and inspire change. Executives turn to her when they want to explore reinvention as a means to grow their organization in a fast changing environment. She's the author of the award winning book, Take the Bull by the Horns, and the creator of the Leadership Journal. Her podcast, CEO on the Go, is designed to inspire leaders who like to learn on the go. Please join me in welcoming Gayle Lantz. Welcome, Gayle.
Thank you, Robbie. Good to
Thanks
be
for joining
here.
us from
Yeah.
your office in Birmingham, Alabama. Thrilled that
Yes.
you're here. You and I have been crossing paths a lot the last few years, but I have a feeling I might learn a thing or two today. This show is about building strong networks, and the context, as I mentioned, is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
Well, I don't know that I have a real formal definition of leadership. The way that I look at it is that it is a way in which you can bring out the best in other people to achieve something really important. So it might be a big vision, a goal, a specific outcome, but the key is really being able to bring out the best in others to achieve it.
I like
So,
that. It's simple, but it feels like it rings true. If we meet that like best in people to do something important consistently, then that is, I mean, to me, it seems like a clear sign of leadership. When did you start to realize you had some of these skill sets?
I was reflecting on that question and it was hard for me because I don't really think I realized it for a very long time. I was just doing my thing. I tend to
Hmm.
see things differently. I'll take on a challenge, question the status quo. And I remember being in a meeting, it was with an all male group of executives that I was leading. And at the very end, one of them came up to me and he said, you really think differently. And I thought I took that as a compliment because it's one of the reasons I think I was brought into their group to help challenge that. But that's one of the times that it dawned on me kind of like I'm owning this as a leader now. Like this is something that I have. Otherwise, it's just something that seems to be very natural to me. People have always said, "You're so driven. You have all these goals," and I'm thinking, well, that's just because I like that. Like I enjoy that. That's what makes my life interesting. But in retrospect, I guess you could consider that leadership.
I'm actually kind of curious. I want to go back a little ways to like Gal on the playground. Gal getting, who were you amongst your peers at a young age? Like, was that driven sense of wanting to get things done? Were you organizing your friends, or were you sort of standing back? Were you running for a school office? Like, what
Yeah.
kind of life did you lead in those early years?
Yeah. I think I love sports, athletics and being involved in all kinds of sports. To me, it was just fun, but it was also a challenge because I had to get better. I had to overcome a lot of my fears in the process. I experimented being involved in a lot of different activities. Springboard diving comes to mind. That's one that I bring up every now and then to talk about the fear of getting to that next level, right? Getting to the next higher board and making yourself do crazy things. So I think that I just started out really enjoying sports, but I was really, really quiet too. So quite an observer, looking around, observing other people, being very self conscious. And so it was a weird dynamic of feeling strong in some ways and taking on challenges, but at the same time having this kind of fear in the background. Hard to describe. It's taken me a long time to come out of my shell and even like be speaking to you today on a podcast, even though I have my own. That's a huge, huge accomplishment over the years.
Was it about being visible back then?
I don't really know. My mom always made me like play the piano in front of people and perform. I think there was some pressure I always felt. I'm not blaming my mom necessarily, but I'm just saying I've always felt like I've been in situations where I've become more visible, whether I like it or not, and I've had to deal with it. So maybe deep down, that is something that's been
Mhm.
something I've had to overcome. Yeah.
Did adults in your life see potential in you? Were you sort of given opportunities to step forward? Like you said, like people were propelling you forward in different ways. Like when you were getting to high school, were
Hmm.
you being sought out to take on different tasks or projects?
Um, I think so. I just always stepped up to the challenge. I tried out for things. Um, I don't I think it was really the confidence from that, I think, came from being involved in sports. But I don't really know, I don't remember being sought out as much as me being interested and saying, "Oh, I think I'd like to do that. I'd like to try out for this or that, so I think I'll do it." And then when I liked it and, was able to excel in it, that's when I was in leadership roles within those kinds of groups.
It's interesting this sort of paradox of you being kind of shy and reserved, and yet
Mhm.
willing to step forward and try something
It's
out, right? And have that
Mhm.
confidence. And
Mhm.
I'm hearing the influence that sports had on you, and also you started to allude that when you did get involved in these other groups, whatever they were, that you ended up taking on some leadership role within it. What was
Mhm.
that like?
At the time I just stepped into it. I don't know that it was necessarily something that I was trying to get myself into. It just seemed to be, that's what I mean, like, to me, it just seemed to be kind of a natural evolution, um, and I would just do whatever it took to make it happen.
It was sort of like you had the skill sets and you weren't gonna wait around for other people to figure it out.
Yeah, but I've never in my mind, never been power hungry, like, "Oh, I really wanna be the top cheerleader or head cheerleader or whatever, or on the dance team or whatever." I just was curious, and I think that's a lot of what has propelled me, as far as I've gone is just being curious and the willingness to explore something that I've never done, which I still do even today.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great developing a curiosity and a willingness to try things is a great asset, that a lot of people, I think, shy away from at young ages in particular, and that
Mhm.
you developed that. You have a lot more muscle memory around, like, trying it, and what happens is you realize you didn't actually die, like,
Yeah.
as scary as it was, you're still here, and so every
Yeah.
time you do it, it gets a little easier, and you just it sounds like you had a lot of opportunities early on, or you sought out or said yes to maybe.
Yeah.
It was more that you said yes more than anything.
Yeah.
At 12 years old, Gal, what did you think you were gonna be when you grew up? What was the sort of career trajectory? Was college a definite thing? Were you heading into the workforce? Is there a family business of some kind?
Yeah, I really didn't have any idea. I think I knew I was going to college, but I thought everything from being an organist to other crazy, for me, not that that's a bad career, but like so far from where I am now. I love music so much. I really didn't know. I remember struggling in college. I requested to meet with the dean because I felt so lost that I couldn't figure out even what I wanted to major in. I ended up majoring in psychology, but I just felt like I did not know,
And
and that was a really uncomfortable feeling for me. It was a
yeah,
really difficult time.
that sounds really hard, and, like, particularly if it seems like other people, your peers and your family, like, all seem like they have very clear roadmaps ahead of them. Of course, most of them didn't, but they were putting it out there like they did.
Yeah.
Uh, but you were feeling that feeling of being a little afloat or, adrift in a sea.
Yeah, yeah. My dad worked for a utility, the telephone company for like 35 years, very traditional
Yeah,
long-term career. My mom is a stay-at-home mom, so I came from a background where the models that I had, at least for women working, were
yeah.
few. So,
So you didn't have that many things to really even project yourself into that future with that vision in mind, like, you had to make it up as you went. What
mhm.
propelled you to go to college? Was that just, like, a given in your family or
Yeah, it was. Education has always been important. My mom was actually the first in her family to go to college.
Mm,
My dad was really smart, went to MIT, Sloan Fellow, uh, always shared like his learnings with me. And so I think for me, I don't remember having any conversation about not going. It was where.
where'd you go to college?
Emory University in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. And so you went in undeclared. It sounds like you were feeling a little bit adrift. You ended up in psychology. What drew you to that major?
I think just wanting to understand people.
Yeah.
And it was the most compared to all the other options, which were not as interesting. I thought that might be something interesting for me to pursue.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I did. I still don't know that a lot of what I've learned over the years applies directly to my degree as much as my life experience. But I think in the retrospect, it was a pretty good fit for me.
Yeah. And did it lend itself like right after college to a career path, or did you still have to figure out where you were going to land?
If I had stayed in the field of mental health, yes. When I was working as a crisis intervention counselor, working there was a mental hospital down the street from Emory at the time where I had worked part-time and thought about pursuing a career doing that kind of work. I love that work. And I'm still involved in crisis kind of involvement today in a volunteer capacity. But I realized early on, at least with where I was, I couldn't make a living doing that. And I needed to make a shift into the business world and started pursuing some options there. Felt equally lost. It reminded me of when I was trying to figure out my major. And then after I graduated, it was a life-changing experience for me to have such a long period of time, again, trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And I read a book called What Color is Your Parachute by Richard Bowles, which is a classic. That later became a really important part of my growth and development when I left the corporate world to become trained in that, which was a book I'd read in college about how to figure out what you want to do with your life and work. So it all kind of came full circle. Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing that book up, because it's a great resource for people who are feeling like a little bit lost as to where to go next and don't have a good catalog of what their skills and assets are and where that might take them. So that's a great reference. We'll put that link to that book in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a classic. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've heard someone bring it up, though. So
yeah.
So I also was thinking about a book. I don't know, maybe I was around 30 when I heard about this book, but someone wrote a book called Quarter Life Crisis. This was 20 years ago, I think, and I heard about this book. And it was this idea that people at 25 years old, 20 years ago, still to today, like have so many more opportunities than the generation before them, which was like get a job, stay in the job, right? Like that was it. Family had a business, you did that. Everyone was a lawyer in your family, you became a lawyer. Like, so the pace at which new things are coming up now, it's becoming even harder. How did you figure out where to take your psychology degree and your mental health sort of, I feel like you're passionate about the topic, right? That's passionate around the mission. How did you figure out where to take all of that and place it in a box called corporate?
It kind of evolved. I don't know that I had it all figured out as a plan. When I first started my business, I was doing career coaching based on a lot of the model and frameworks that I'd learned through What Color's Your Parachute, and was working with people to figure out what they wanted to do. And then I realized, to me, that the greater opportunity to make even a bigger impact, instead of like helping people escape from their jobs and figuring out how to get out, I could figure out a way to help them stay and thrive by working with leaders who are so instrumental in helping them grow and develop. So I was doing similar work, but helping leaders become more equipped at helping people navigate their careers and figuring out what lights them up and how they can be engaged in the workforce. So again, it wasn't a plan as much as just kind of getting to a little turning point and realizing, I don't know that this is working in the way that it did, and I'm interested in exploring something else. I also, leveraging my corporate background, it made sense to focus more on the corporate background as opposed to just working strictly with individuals. I felt like I was limiting myself by not leveraging my corporate experience.
What was your corporate experience between the time you were doing like the mental health field and becoming an entrepreneur?
I worked for a very large insurance and financial services company called TIAA. It's one of the largest in the industries, and managed a team of financial consultants in the Southeast area. It was headquartered in New York. The company was. I did a lot of traveling, became a million miler frequent flyer before I turned 30, It was just a lot of, and at that time I thought, oh, this is normal. This is just what people do in their work, until I realized this does not necessarily have to be normal. And so again, needed to make some lifestyle changes. And that's when I ultimately made the decision to start my own business. And that's when the career coaching started, which
Yeah.
eventually has morphed into working with organizations as a whole and with CEOs and senior executives.
Were you partnered at the time that you decided to go into entrepreneurship?
I was in an executive level,
Yeah.
at a very young age.
Wow.
People thought I was crazy because on the outside it looked really
Yeah.
glamorous, and yeah, it was a lucrative position, and one in which I felt like I was not aligned with anymore. I was talking about how, how to balance portfolios, pension plans, stocks and bonds and investments, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to understand, how are people making decisions? What's most important to them? What are they really planning for? I was so much more curious about the people issue, which was really, I think, also rooted in my own discovery process, knowing that I wanted to make a shift. So I studied, how do people go through transition? How do they make difficult decisions? What new career paths are possible? How can people overcome fear? This overcoming fear thing, which is really, that's the main thing that blocks, I think, almost anyone from making decisions. It's not external things, it's the internal stuff going on in our minds. So I started studying a lot of that just on my own to understand it better. And now I integrate a lot of that in the work that I do with other people.
I mean, it sounds like people are such a through line. Your curiosity around people is such a through line of like
Yeah.
how you decided to choose your undergrad major, what drew you, even when doing the mental health work is around people, and then
Yes.
how what was sort of missing and what you were seeking in the corporate space, and what got you excited about that.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that you wanted to explore that, but then going from I mean, at least there's the illusion of the safety and security and stability of a 9 to 5 career job, paychecks, and all that stuff.
Mhm.
I say illusion because of all the mergers,
It
acquisitions,
is
and layoffs.
true. Yes.
It's not actually as safe as we had once thought. Um, but how did you make that shift? Did you know entrepreneurs at that time? Like, what led you to
No.
think to start doing this career stuff when
Yeah.
you'd had a career coaching when you'd had a job
Yeah.
and a career, and like you said, a good one.
Yes. Honestly, Robbie, and I will admit this on camera, I did not think of it as a business when I started it. I just wanted to help people, and I was on a mission. I was actually becoming the person that I most needed to have when I was in corporate, somebody to help me think through things, somebody objective, a good thought partner. And so I didn't think of it as a business until I really started moving away from doing pure career coaching to contracting with organizations and understanding this is a business, and I
Yeah,
need to be thinking more about how to create value and about the specific problems that they have. And it was interesting to see how similar they are to what individuals struggle with. We're all systems
yeah.
in some way.
Did you
So
start that as a side hustle while you were still employed,
I
or
did. Yeah. I
oh,
started learning assessments when I was in the corporate world, thinking, well, I'm going to need some tools to help people. So I, looked at Myers-Briggs and became qualified in that, and some others. And so I did start that on the side, just again, out of my interest and curiosity to see what it was about. And then just following the breadcrumbs, like, I want to do more of this.
I mean, that makes sense though, that you weren't thinking of it as a business because it was a side hustle, hobby, and you made a little money, but you were helping people. It felt good. I mean,
Yep.
for a while, like it wasn't about the money; it was just about the passion, and you were learning, and
Yes.
people started to appreciate. They started paying you, and
Yes.
the best advice I've gotten on that, it came from Dory Clark, and she said, "You'll know it's time to leave your day job when it gets in the way of your business."
Yeah.
And so, at what point did you realize? Like, did you make this shift to working with corporate really quickly? Did you make that only after you left your own day job? Like, when did it start to become, like you said, a business and a little more of a B2B business?
I think it was a few years after I'd gotten my feet wet, working strictly with individuals. And
Yeah,
the way in which I was working at that time, doing purely one-on-ones, was not, like I said, it was not going to work for me in the long run. So I think it was at that time when I started doing informational interviews with companies. And I would say, I'm thinking about starting this service, or working with companies in this way to help their employees really take charge of their careers and to be more proactive, and to not be dependent on leaders, to always be, creating an opening where they can be much more engaged in the process. And this was years ago. And at the time, I met with some companies that would say, "That's great, Gayle. I think you're a little ahead of the curve," but then I realized there are other companies that were already, of that kind of mindset and seeing it. So I've always tried to just gravitate toward organizations that I think are a little more leading edge and want to be, as opposed to trying to convince those who aren't there yet, because they're not ready for me. So
what year is that you start to really get into this?
I would say it was in the mid 2000s when I started kind of moving away from career coaching. Some people still perceive me that way. First impressions matter. Even today, some people say, "Oh, do you think you can help my son? He's just out of college, figure out what he wants to do." So even today, some people still perceive me as a career coach when I'm really so far beyond that in terms of where the business is today. But that's okay.
Yeah. No, it is true. Like sometimes they haven't stayed current with what you're doing.
Yeah.
So as you were trying to build this all out, how did you find the network to support you? How did you fill in the gaps between what you knew and what you didn't know or didn't even know to ask about? I mean, the content was something I think you were pretty good at developing, but there's so much more to running a business than that.
Yeah. I love learning. And so I would actively seek out people or groups. Like when I moved back to Alabama, I joined a women's business organization. So that provided some networking, and women who were already in business, which I needed more exposure to. And then also in my field, in leadership development, organizational development, management consulting, I would attend conferences back in the day when we did so much more in person. And so I met other great people who are now my colleagues, who are in similar businesses or who have similar business models. So I'm such an advocate of just go where you need to learn. That's how we met. I said, I think I need to learn more about Zoom and how to leverage that during the pandemic. And you had this wonderful group that I tuned into, and still have friends from that. So I think it happens organically when you don't put pressure on yourself. I hate having to go out and socialize and go to some of the networking events. I don't think, honestly, that that's the best approach. I so rather be among other people who have a shared interest in wanting to learn something or similar goals. To me, over time, that's been by far the most effective approach.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it sounds like you're also were willing to put yourself out there. Like you both have it's like a reticence about like those just so big networking events, but you're willing to put yourself at a conference that had to focus on learning a specific topic because you knew it would attract the people that you would want to meet anyway, and you'd be meeting each other through the process of learning together. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, Toastmasters is another great example.
Oh, yeah.
I have a lot of friends that are struggling with public speaking, and I was in Toastmasters for years before National Speakers Association, where I know you and I are also colleagues. But that just wherever you can go to small groups, because I tend to be more introverted and I really like that dynamic. And I think you can connect better that way. So wherever you can find kind of small clusters of people that want to learn and grow together, the more power you'll have, and it'll build your confidence too. I'm still continuing to work on speaking too, as a skill set and value creation for my clients.
Do you create like a learning plan each year? Like how do you decide what you're going to focus on?
People who know me well know I'm not a planner.
I was curious. Yeah.
I take inspired action. And so I will give some thought to some overall themes or big goals. I don't necessarily have a very well structured plan. It's more of a general framework of here are the key things I want to learn this year.
Do you ever think about there are certain kinds of people that you want to have in your life, not just learning, but like, have you sought out people who have sort of either complementary or certain kinds of either skill sets or styles of business or something, like you're like, oh, where do those people hang out? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, again, some of that happens organically, but I like to be around people who are growth minded, who like to learn, which is why I find them at a lot of these workshops and educational events. Most recently, I've really enjoyed being part of a group that attracts people who want to learn more about reinvention, how organizations and even individuals can reinvent themselves. So there's a great, global network of people that I've been connected to through one of the podcast guests that I've even had recently on the topic. So that's every iteration of who I am or where my business is, I think makes me think differently about who I need to be around and also who I need to kind of disassociate with too at the same time, which I think is part of the growth
Yeah.
process.
As you were settling into this particular iteration of having a business where you're working with companies, you said some are on the leading edge and they're willing to like do these things or ready to take them on.
Yeah.
Did you find that certain industries were more open to that? And has it expanded since then? Do you feel like it's the work that you're doing around like human-centered work and making work matter and all like human leadership and all? It feels like it's a lot more popular now than it had been.
It is. Yeah. I think some industries are more receptive. It's interesting. I see the tech industry, for example, becoming more people focused, or understanding the need to develop leadership where there's a strong emphasis on how to understand and influence people. But other than that, it really depends on the leaders at the top and the culture of the organization. So there's some organizations that are still kind of stuck in the past, old school model. Like I said, they're not the ones that I'm even trying to convince at this point that they need to be looking ahead and becoming more modernized. But I think a lot of the small and mid-sized companies that are more nimble anyway are more receptive to some of the ideas and thinking that I bring.
How did you find those first few clients before you had traction in that space?
Word of mouth, just talking to people that I knew, telling them, hey, I remember when I started, I didn't call it a business. I said, hey, I'm going to look for people I can help who are struggling, trying to figure out what they want to do. So it's being very straightforward in terms of who you're trying to reach and the problem that you're wanting to help them with and not worrying about the rest of it. I also did some speaking. Speaking in some local civic groups on topics that I cared about that I thought would be helpful. And so that's
really
another great marketing, opportunity.
That sounds like it was geared more towards the first iteration of your business, right? When you were helping people do more career coaching.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned earlier you did informational interviews with companies.
Yes.
How did you figure out which companies to reach out to? Was that connected through your network? Like, I mean, how did you approach that?
It was through networking. Yeah, it is. So, and relationships are key. If I could get a warm connection through someone and I'd say, I'm thinking about, wanting to contact this company, ABC company, who do you know? And they'd say, oh, I know head of HR here, or you should really talk to so-and-so. So again, you follow those breadcrumbs where people will actually guide you. The problem I had is that I really, as much as I know that I should, and even still today, I don't necessarily say, I want to work with this company. I'm so people focused. It's like, show me a leader that wants to help their team go through change. Show me a leader who's open to new ideas, where they don't think that they've got it all figured out, or they're not going to argue for what they've always done. So to me, I'm almost agnostic about the industry or even size or type of business. It's so much more oriented around leaders. So when I'm communicating with my market, that's who I'm talking about. Do you know somebody that's in the midst of change or that's really struggling with their team, where they really feel like they're, losing ground or losing their competitive edge, or they just want to make sure that they're ahead of the curve? And people can tell me who those leaders are. So that's the way I do it. But I'm there are other people that target companies, which is great too. I've just never been successful at saying, I want to go do work at this particular company.
When I was setting up for your interview, I was surprised how much you had created on Amazon, like workbook, journals and stuff. I don't think I knew.
I forget to promote it, Robbie. Yeah, because I'm on to the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So what led you to start down that path of creating that kind of content, particularly a substantial thing like a book? Or it just how did that help you sort of set yourself up for success in your career, your
At one
business?
point, I was told or thought I have to have a book to have credibility. But on another level, I considered myself someone who had some good ideas that needed to be shared. So, how I created my first book was actually taking old content that I had created in the form of a newsletter and
Mm,
kind of pieced together a lot of the content that was called "Take the Bull by the Horns." Um, and I joke that my next book is going to be called "Stop Taking the Bull by the Horns." Like, you don't have to work so hard and knock yourself out. Like, it can be easier. So that's how I created the first one, is just really taking pieces of content that I already developed, like a big puzzle, and tried to put that together. And then some of the other one, like I do have one out there on life work planning that I created, this workbook, or very, very slim book for retreats that I began doing to help. At the time, I was working more with women executives that were trying to figure out what they wanted to do going forward. And so the life work planning workbook was created as a supplement to that retreat. And I thought, why not put it on Amazon in case it can help somebody else? So that's the
yeah.
kind of stuff that I do. And the leadership journal too starts out as, oh, I think this can help my clients, but it's got to be easy and simple. They don't have a lot of time. So the leadership journal was another tool that I created for my clients that, Amazon was almost an afterthought.
Hmm. It makes sense.
But now I think Amazon, there's huge opportunity to create more
Yeah.
value that way.
Yeah, you can do some bundles, and I mean, it sounds like your stuff is all out there for
I just
people
don't
to look
promote
up.
it. So
Yeah.
thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow." Like, look at all that stuff. We'll have all the links in the show notes, folks. So
Yeah.
if you wanna
Yeah.
dive into any of the books or journals that you just mentioned. Um, you have a tremendous network. You're curious, you enjoy people, you seek out people who have similar interests, that are
Mhm.
abundant-minded and, like, growth mindset. How do you think about that staying connected? Like, you're gonna stay connected with, like, the inner circle of people, right? But
Mhm.
that second and third tier or layer out, the people you might see once a year at a conference, or you work with them 5 years ago, but you haven't had cause to work with them since.
Mhm.
You like each other. I should start with that. You enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
How do you think about nurturing and sustaining those kinds of weaker ties? Any habits, philosophies, practices?
It's something that I don't do well, honestly. So, and I've thought about some practices that I could probably um, implement. So that's a gap with where I am. The One of the ways I'm reconnecting is through my podcast, bringing them on as guests, or reaching out, or just making them aware that I have a podcast now. So it's a light touch, but also I just think one of the best things to do, and this is so simple, it sounds silly, but I'm guessing you might agree. Like, put a date on your calendar to reach out, like on a Friday, to somebody that you haven't talked to in a while, and just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And
Mhm.
not have any agenda. It really, except to just see how they're doing and remind them that they're an important person in your life. Like, it does not have to be hard. Um, like I said, I'm not overly structured, so I tend to resist ideas where I've got to be like checking a box every day. So, but that's probably something that I would need to
I
do. Is,
I don't know all your Myers-Briggs, but you're very much a P, aren't you?
oh yeah, yeah,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and
Speaking to
proud of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. People are always like, "Well, we can help you get more organized." I'm like, "No, I'm
No, you're
okay with
good.
it."
You're good with it.
Yeah. So,
That's funny. I'm very clearly a J.
yeah, that's why I can tell you're like, "Oh, I've got this system for this, and I've got this process," which is great. Everybody's different, but
Yeah, that's kind of the thing about being human. Um, do you ever host things? Like, you talked about hosting retreats. Do you host
yeah,
dinners or salons or discussions? What led to the retreats? Like, I mean, that's another way to bring people together, and it seems
yeah.
like you have some interesting people in your network.
Yeah, I love doing retreats, and they've all started from a need that I've witnessed. When I thought I had a strong enough group that could come together, I've done some for executive women in my local area. One of my favorites was a retreat that I started at a beautiful park here, at a tree house, beautiful glass room where you can get people off site. Just, it could be half a day or full day. You don't have to make it hard. Um, so that's some of what I've done. I also experiment a lot. I brought some executives together years ago, called something called like Sunrise. executive something where I just invited a few people, maybe 15 or so in my community, and we met for breakfast once a month, and I would put a topic on the table and get some discussion going. So once again, you can see the theme of experimentation and just noticing where the common needs are. And I've even did something for young people. A few young people reached out to me after hearing me speak at an event one time, and they were asking for help to figure out how they could do well in their work and what they need to think about in terms of leadership. And I typically don't serve a market with people in their 20s, right? Right out of school that are new. But I said, hey, if you want to get a group of people together, I'll show up. So for a few sessions, I branded it. It was called Forge Ahead, because we were holding in a building called Forge, and had them invite people in their network, right? Because it's got to be easy for me. So we did a few sessions like that just for young professionals that wanted to learn more about leadership in an informal dialogue way. So I guess that answers your question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And as far as networking, do you do anything that's sort of not business focused in that front? I mean, sounds like the 15 people for breakfast falls into that category of just
Yeah.
gathering people around you because you think it'd be interesting.
Yeah. Personally, I mean, I have my own personal interests, of the activities that I'm involved in. So I have, natural relationships that form there based on what I'm doing in my personal life.
Yeah.
I also I may have mentioned I run executive peer groups, some of which I've been running.
Oh.
The longest one is running 20 years. Small groups of executives who've become friends now, given that it's a
20
really
years.
unique, it's hard to say, but it's true. They're an amazing group, and they've really clicked over the past few years, and they've become really good friends. So I just think things happen when you're not trying too hard to make them happen. If you can put yourself in an environment where you're learning, you feel like you're enjoying the experience, why not just keep figuring out what could be next and not trying to map out everything? Things are going to change so much anyway. See, I'm arguing again against having this big old plan. But if you can get more fluid and just kind of be guided by where your energy naturally wants to go, then good things will flow from that.
So speaking of plans being disrupted, what was the impact in your business when March 2020 happened?
That's when I launched my podcast. And so the impact, I think, could have been a lot worse had I not had a means to continue to provide value, at least virtually, that way. So I think it had a temporary impact, but I also think it had an extremely positive impact on my business because it allowed me to stretch out of my comfort zone and create a body of work that makes what I do and what I deliver even more valuable. So, and I'm always the optimist. So even if it wasn't that good, I'm going to find a way to spin it and say, it probably helped strengthen me and put me on a different track. To me, it opened up so much more possibility globally as well that I probably would not have explored as seriously had it not been for that.
So did virtual programming become a core component over the last few years?
The groups that I had been running, the ones in person in my local area, we just met by Zoom.
Yeah.
And instead of meeting monthly, some were meeting every other week because they just needed that connection during that time.
Yeah, that's great. And that's how you and I kind of crossed paths because you were dabbling in the world of Zoom and nomorbadszoom.com. And that's awesome. So I know we're going to stay in touch because you and I seem to cross paths on a regular basis in a number of ways. Innovation Women being one of them. NSA's Influence Conference is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see each other actually in person, which is amazing. So if we're talking a year from now, when I realize it's been a year since we had this interview, and I ask you, wow, hey, what's been going on? What are we celebrating these days? What are you going to be toasting a year from now? What are you most looking forward to?
Gosh, you're gonna make me say it out loud, so it's got to happen, right? I'm finally going to finish my next book. Yeah, so that would be good for me. Like I said, it's not. I love the first book that I wrote. Sometimes you got to take the bull by the horns, but sometimes you don't, and there are easier way to do things. So I'm looking forward to getting that. So that would be a real big accomplishment if we would be talking a year from now and celebrating that I finally got that book out.
Yeah, I'm really
It's
excited.
coming.
I'm
Yeah.
excited for the book. I'm excited for the launch of the book because I'm excited about launches.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I would have done, that would have been my 4th year of my podcast. I know you're ahead of me on that, but I've done about 150 episodes of CEO on the Go. So who
Yes,
knows where I'll be.
you'll be at
Yeah.
200 or so by then. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the longevity of a podcast. Anything past
Thank you.
100 really is remarkable.
It is.
Considering
Anything
how
past
few.
5. Are you
I
kidding me?
know. It's like it's real stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how can people find you and follow your work?
Oh, I would love for people to reach out to me. LinkedIn is a great way. That's about the only social media platform that I'm somewhat active on. WorkMatters.com is my site. So, and you can connect with me there at WorkMatters.com is probably the best thing.
Awesome. We're going to put all those links, including a link to your podcast in the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Gayle, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for letting me be on this side for a change. I've really enjoyed it. I should do this more. So.